Let's go.
Let's go.
Oh, did you want to?
Sorry, I'll let you.
Next time.
I'm in love with you.
Snap out of it.
I'll have what she's having.
Too many guys think I'm a concept, or I complete them, or I'm gonna make them alive. I'm just a fucked up girl who's looking for my own peace of mind. Don't assign me yours.
Caustic wit is my religion.
I would make a great queen because I am so stubborn.
I say when it comes to stardom and Lauren, there are no accidents.
Hi, Karen Peterson.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Citizen Dame, the podcast where it's 2021. We made it. We made it through 2020. Like we did. I don't know. It was, I'm so tired.
It was a little touch and go there for a second, but we got through it.
It has been a year or... I am
what
Lauren
a
Humphries.
Decade we had last year.
It so was. I am Lauren Humphries Brooks. With me, as always, is Karen Peterson. Hi, Karen.
Hello.
And how is your Christmas / New Year's / holiday celebrations in this COVID-19 world?
I'm gonna be honest. Obviously, I wish that we were living in a world without COVID, and I wish that we had more than 0% capacity in our ICU beds here in California. But that being said, I didn't mind the I'm trying to think now how to, what are words? I did not mind having a calmer, quieter holiday this year. And just, I mean, obviously I wish it was by choice, but just not having the normal hustle and bustle, it made it nice to just sit with my family. Yes, I was with my family on Christmas and on New Year's Eve, but it was nice to just be able to sit and enjoy each other's company. We didn't feel all stressed and overwhelmed because it was honestly, for us, it was just a really relaxing season. And obviously, I wish that we could bring back the 350,000 people that have been lost and the millions who've been sick. And I would definitely trade them back for, a relaxing season, but it was kind of one of those things where it's like, well, you make the best of it. And so it was, for us, it was a nice Christmas. How about you?
Yeah, same here. I mean, usually now I'm an only child, and usually I spend Christmas with my parents anyway, so it's just me and them, which is what it was this year. So it wasn't that big of a difference, really, in a lot of ways, except that there was that more, actually the biggest difference was that both sides of my family suddenly decided these are two sides of the family that never spend Christmas together. We're just like, you know what we should do? We should have big family Zoom. And it's like, we don't do this. This isn't something that we do. What are you talking about? We're never all together on Christmas. But I mean, it was nice. And it was actually, I've said to some of my friends that, I've talked with more people during this pandemic that I would never have spoken with on a regular basis in like a normal time. I have a weekly phone call weekly Zoom call with some of my best friends from high school, people that I've known forever. And we usually will have like a Christmas party because everybody's back upstate during Christmas and things like that. We'll spend New Year's together, something like that. But generally, we're not going to have like extensive conversations every week in a normal year. And we have this year. So that's been, obviously this is not the best situation and we don't want to be in this situation, but there are some good things, I think, personally for some of us that have come out of it.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, sometimes you just have to make the best of a bad situation. And I feel like I've been able to do that this year too. It's been nice to be able to kind of cut out some of the people, well, not people, some of the people that I was kind of by proximity spending a lot of time around and not having to have those interactions, but also being much more intentional with the people that I do talk to on a regular basis. And I feel like in a weird way, not being able to see some people has strengthened bonds and strengthened friendships a little bit more than we could have just seeing each other periodically. Yeah. Like you're saying. So it's been it's been a very interesting experience. I think for me, coming out of this and going into 2021, we were kind of joking about this a little bit before we started, but I feel like, yeah, I've really just am going into this year with like, just, I don't give a fuck about things. You know, it's like, I'm just going to do what I feel like is really important, what matters to me. Obviously, what matters to me is people. Well, I hope that's obvious. I don't know. And so it's not like I'm just going to be this really selfish monster now, but I'm going to be a lot more intentional in how I interact with people and just not putting up with a bunch of bullshit that I just don't need to put up with anymore. I'm just going to spend the time around the people that I care about and do the things that make us happy.
Yeah, I think that that's important. You know, you got to strike that balance between calling out the bullshit and also just being like, okay, you're like beneath my time, really. Yep. Like, I really shouldn't waste my time with you, which is always difficult, particularly being women on the internet, as we know.
Yes.
So it's just sort of like, do I spend all of this time or do I just call you a fucking moron and move on?
Exactly.
How important is this?
Will this really change anything if I engage in this conversation?
Yeah, exactly. Although, and this is going to lead very nicely, I think, into our discussion today.
What a great segue.
One of the issues that I always run into in particularly, and a lot of what we're talking about is engaging on Twitter, although I don't engage on Facebook that much anymore. I don't know if you do, but so like, that's not where I have my film debates. I have my film debates on Twitter.
No, I have my political debates on Facebook with my family.
Oh, God bless you.
I've stopped that now that the election's over. So
not even. Oh my God. Is it though? No. But so yeah, film debates generally take place on Twitter, and film Twitter is, as we all know, a terrible, terrible place.
It's amazing how bad it is.
And the thing is, there's some really smart people and people that I really respect and people that I think are great critics and very like, even when I don't agree with them, I'm like, yes, you make good points and you present your points well, and you're not like mind-bogglingly furious that other people don't agree with you all the time, etc. But there is always that moment where it's like, okay, is this something that I need to disagree with? Is this something that is doing some kind of damage? And one of the things that I often run into, particularly in arguing with men, let's be honest here, is that you get men who are expressing their own personal opinion, but they're also expressing sexism and misogyny. And so it's a problem that is broader in some ways than like the individual guy who is being the reply guy or is saying the sexist shit or is even saying something that he doesn't realize is sexist. And I'm also a cisgendered white woman on the internet, and that means that I have a lot of privilege and that there are a lot of things that I don't completely understand, and I understand that, I recognize that. So let's talk about Wonder Woman 84, a movie that has been quite surprisingly, in my mind, very controversial, has kind of provoked a lot of different opinions, has provoked some like attacks on film critics for no apparent reason. Like this was one that absolutely boggled my mind. I don't want to get too much into it, but this has been a really divisive film, and I did not expect it to be divisive. What did you expect with this, Karen?
Well, first of all, this was my most anticipated film of 2020. Yes, even over Top Gun Maverick. And I spent the whole year expecting this movie to be amazing, just like the first one. And I thought that the critics, like everybody was just going to fall in love with it as soon as they saw it. And then that first wave of reviews hit, they were all very positive. This is the movie that we need right now. This is great. It's amazing. And I was just like, yay, I'm so excited. Patty Jenkins did it. And then the second wave of reviews hit, and they were like the polar opposite. And I just went, wait, what's going on? And I got a text message from a friend who said Wonder Woman's not good. And I was just like, you're lying. No, I'm not lying. I'm like, oh my gosh, what's going on here? So yeah, it was really weird. So when I went into it, when I sat down on Christmas Day to watch the movie, I was a little bit nervous going into it because of the backlash, the vitriol that had already started. It was such a weird, I don't know, it was such a weird experience. And then I watched the movie and I'm like, I don't understand why people hate this. I mean, it's not perfect, and I wouldn't even say it's as good as the first movie, but it's not this like monstrous, terrible, like evil thing that people are making it out to be. And I'm just, I'm tired.
Exactly. Well, but that's the thing. So yeah, I kind of had the same experience that you did. The initial reviews are just like, oh, it sounds like it's good, right? And I loved the first one, and I was like, okay, this is a sequel, 1980s, all right, sure, whatever. I don't really care that much, but this will be fun. And that was what surprised me, was the vitriol.
Yeah.
And it was, and now I will say that, and there's been a lot of discussion about whether or not this is gendered, and I think that we're going to get into that a little bit. There were plenty of women who did not like this movie, and they had very legitimate reasons for not liking it, and they explained them in their reviews or in their analyses. And even though I might not necessarily agree with them, I get it, right? The vitriol that I saw particularly, there was this gleeful hate coming particularly from male critics.
Yeah.
Like, and when I say gleeful hate, I mean like actively enjoying, right, people just stomping on the film. Mm-hmm. Basically tweet, and I admit that I did this with Joker, but it was mostly because I knew that it was going to piss off the anti-Ghostbusters people, like posting the Rotten Tomatoes score as it went down, and like talk about, oh, well, look what happened, Patty Jenkins. There's this anger that was coming through that honestly, at a certain point in the proceedings, and this was coming from some men that I respect as critics, that I think are good writers, I didn't expect this from. And the nastiness began to get really troubling to me. And so I guess I want to talk a little bit about whether or not there is a gendered component to the reaction to this film. That, did you perceive the same thing? And obviously some of this is anecdotal because I follow certain people on Twitter, I don't follow other people, things
Mm-hmm.
like that, but that was just my experience of the critical reaction to it.
I think like with most things, when we talk about things like the male gaze and the female gaze, and we talk about I don't know, when we just, a lot of different topics within criticism that we've discussed here on the podcast, I think that what I've seen here is, sure, men and women both seem to dislike this movie and also like this movie. Some of the loudest voices I've heard in favor of it have come from men too. So it's interesting, but it's like we've talked about before with other topics, the way men and women are talking about the things that they didn't like about this, they're talking about it very differently. And like what you were just saying about this almost glee from men that are panning it, it's like they were rooting for Patty, like, oh, see, we knew a woman couldn't direct two great movies in a row. Let's kind of, I haven't come across anybody who's specifically overtly said that, but that's been sort of the impression that I've gotten, is that they were waiting for her to fail because the first movie was so good and she couldn't possibly pull it off twice. And that's just so gross. And it's frustrating. But, sorry.
No, so I was going to just kind of build on what you were saying there. I do think that you're right, that they're waiting for, there's definitely a group of male critics, and some of them are men who consider themselves to be allies as well.
Yeah.
Who, it feels like they have been waiting for a female director to make an imperfect film. And we've talked about this issue before, where female directors, female writers, female-driven films generally have to be perfect. Otherwise, they're the worst thing ever. Like, that's the way that women are particularly approached. And we're talking about primarily white women too. We're not even talking about the issue of race coming into all of that. But so I got this impression that they were angry in some way that the first Wonder Woman did get some nasty reactions as well, particularly from men, but it was largely positive, right?
Yeah.
And so I do feel like they were waiting for this film to be imperfect, to not be as good. Mm-hmm. And they kind of have indulged, and it's misogyny. Like at the end of the day, it's low-key misogyny, but it's misogyny all the same.
Yeah.
And some of the guys that I was seeing doing this, I was like, I even said to one of them, I was like, dude, you've spent the past 3 days talking about how violently you hate this film. Like, and having seen the film, this is not a film to hate violently. Like, you can dislike it or, you know, have issues with it or anything, but I don't know why you hate it so much. And that kind of indicates to me that you're doing that. There's something else going on here that isn't really about the quality of the film. So I don't know. I do think that there is this gendered component to the way the critics have reacted to it and to some of the things that have been said. But there's also this general attitude that it, because it's imperfect, it's the worst thing ever.
Yeah, and we see that a lot on film Twitter in particular. It's this weird binary. Something's either the best or the worst. There's no in between. We can't have something that's just good or something that's just okay. It's like we just are operating in these extremes, and it's really it's mind-boggling. And that's the thing. I'm watching this and sure, I think that there are some issues with it, and I think that some of the, especially some of like the political stuff, when you look back on the context of the 80s, some of it is just like, that maybe could have been explored in a little bit healthier way. But ultimately, I feel like this is such a harmless movie because it's about Diana Prince, Wonder Woman, she's just about love and helping people in healthy, positive ways. And there's just it's such a good message for right now. It's what we need. And so for people to act like this movie is somehow causing harm to them because it's not perfect is just such a weird takeaway for me.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, very much so. So let's start with some questions, because we did get a couple of questions about this, and this would be kind of a good jumping off point for some of this conversation. So the first question that we got was from Paula at Positspa, and she has thoughts on the trope of having too much power in regards to wishes. And do you think if you can make a wish, would you make one regardless of the consequences? So let's start with the first part of that question, which is the basic conceit of this film, which is that there has been this discovery of this stone, right, that essentially acts as a monkey paw, where you make a wish for something, you have one wish, you can make a wish for something on this stone, and you get it, but there are consequences to getting it, right? You lose something at the same time.
Mm-hmm. By the way, we should probably mention that we're going to spoil this movie a lot. So if you haven't watched it yet, you might want to not listen anymore.
Yeah, this is all spoilers all the time, you know?
Yeah.
Like, so this is a pretty common trope, right? This is the monkey paw trope.
Yes, which they mention multiple times in the movie.
Yeah, and I feel like, again, some critics didn't hear it or weren't paying attention because they're like, okay, this is literally like a known story. Don't you know, you make a wish and you get what you want, but it's not really what you want. There are consequences to it.
Yeah, exactly. And it is something that's been used in a lot of movies, a lot of literature. It's a very common concept, trope, idea. And I mean, I'm not sure exactly how to answer the question.
Well, it's really about so there's the entire conceit is that all of the main characters, other than Steve, who is a wish.
Mm-hmm. Yes, he is.
And I think we should talk about him in a minute. But so all of them make a wish on this stone, and they get what they wish for. Right now, we do have to say that both Diana and Barbara, when they make their wishes, they don't know that it's actually going to come true. Right. So you got to give them a little bit of leeway there, where it's just like, oh, I did not know that was going to be a thing. Okay. But one of the things that I really liked about this is that all of the wishes, all the things that the characters desire are really understandable, right? So Diana she wants Steve back. That's what she's wishing for.
And we'll talk about that more in depth in a minute too.
Yeah, and so she's this is the man that she loves. This is someone that she lost, that she wants back, that she's kind of been longing for a very long time. And so the wish is completely, it's a legitimate one. It's like, I understand why she wants that. Not least because he's Chris Pine. uh, Barbara Barbara wishes to be more like Diana. So she's really wishing for is to have the confidence and the capabilities and the beauty and the things that Diana has. And again, this seems very natural. This is a woman who has made a friend that she really admires, who like seems to be so wonderful and so perfect. And she wants to be more like her. Understandable. Even Maxwell Lord, you're like, I understand why he wants what he wants. And it's twisted ultimately, and it's dangerous, but he wants to make good so badly. He wants to make his son proud of him. And that's what's at the base of all of this. And then he becomes sort of mad with power, and things begin, he's almost completely stripped of his humanity as a result. But all of these wishes are very real ones. They're very human. And I kind of wonder whether some of the reaction to that is the fact that we've got a superhero who makes a bad decision. She's making a mistake by longing for Steve. She's making a mistake by wishing for him and keeping him when she does get him. And she kind of knows that. But we don't want her to be weak in any sense. We don't want her to have those desires. And it's ultimately a very selfish thing that she does. She wants this one man back, and she doesn't want to give him up when she gets him back. Understandable, also somewhat selfish, and ultimately, something that she has to deal with. But what I really liked was that it was this very human reaction to being told you can have anything that you want.
Yeah, exactly. It's so Diana does just make this wish that is just kind of in passing. She's just thinking like, oh, if I could really make a wish, this is what I would wish for. And then it happens, and she doesn't realize that there's a trade-off right away. She doesn't realize that her powers are going to be taken away from her as a result. Until she starts to actually notice that things are not, that she's not as strong, like when she's trying to bust the lock, and some other things. Then she starts to realize like, oh, wait, there's more to this. But by that point, she and Steve have already gotten to spend some time together, and she feels like she got what she wanted. And it's interesting because it reminded me, watching this movie reminded me so much of Superman 2, the Richard Donner one from the like 1980-81. Mm-hmm. Which in that movie, Superman, Clark Kent, decides that he wants to be mortal to be with Lois, and he gives up his powers to be with her. And obviously that doesn't go well, and then he ends up needing them back and has to again make a trade-off. And it's a little bit different because he doesn't have to like let Lois be dead, but just thematically it's very similar. And so I think that for Diana, who has longed for Steve, she would give up her powers to be with him forever. Of course she can't, because the world needs her as Wonder Woman. But I just think it's such an interesting thing. Like sometimes we do have those moments in life, and I think that's one of the beautiful things about this movie, and I think that it's something that some people have missed, is just that sometimes even superheroes have very human moments and need to be a little selfish. And considering how much of their lives are devoted to complete selflessness, it makes sense that once in a while they'd be like, you know what, I'm going to take something for myself. And that's what Diana does here.
Yeah, and she even makes that very explicit at one point. She says, like, why can't I have anything? Why can't I? This is the one thing that I want. Yeah. And I can't have it. And that's, yeah, again, it's selfish, and it's also human, and it's natural. And it is kind of like, yeah, why can't she? Like, And so, yeah, it makes sense because you can't bring people back from the dead. That's a bad idea. It never works. Like, don't do it.
Exactly.
But so, and then the second problem that has been oft discussed in relationship to this film is the issue of consent, and particularly male consent. So when Steve returns, he returns in the body of another man. It's not entirely clear how this all worked. Like, where did the guy go?
Well, I mean, when you say not entirely clear, it's not explained at all.
Yeah. I was just like, so is like he just gone? Is he just vanished, or what? Now, in some ways, I think that this is intended, and they definitely should have explored it more. I think that some of this is intended as, okay, this is one of the consequences of making this kind of wish. So she gets Steve back, but in doing so, she actually like destroys or imprisons, or something happens to a totally innocent guy.
Yeah, and I think this is part of where the selfishness comes in for her, because there's a self-care aspect. She wants to be with her love, and is that really selfish, or is that taking care of herself and her own personal needs? The selfishness to me comes in by not questioning it and not wondering, like, what did I do to this other guy in the process?
And I do wish that the film had explored that more, and I think that they missed a beat in doing that, though at the same time I kind of understand why they didn't, given that it's already a 2.5-hour film. But I wish that they had addressed that, and a number of people have talked about this issue of consent, that basically they're using this man's body, right? So I think that this is one of the most legitimate criticisms of the film and the way that the film represents things, partially because we tend to not talk about male consent as much, and this has been a subject that has come up a couple of times recently. I know that this came up, and it also comes up in the new Netflix series Bridgerton, where there's almost this assumption that when men have sex with women, they always consent to sex, which isn't true. And so I completely get that criticism of it, and I do wish that the film had gone into it more. Although in the back of all of this, I think that there is a critique of this as being one of the consequences of making this kind of wish. And as Diana's aunt tells her at the beginning of the film, you're cheating. And she is cheating. She wants Steve back, and she's cheating another person out of his life. And she's cheating herself, and she's cheating him. And it's ultimately something that she has to deal with.
Yeah, I wish that there had been at least something to indicate who this guy was, why Steve ended up in his body. When I was watching it the second time, I was looking a little bit more closely around her, and I thought, oh, maybe he's the guy that hails the cab or something. And I don't think he was. So it's like, I don't know where this guy came from. And it would have made a little bit more sense to me if he was someone that she had at some point interacted with before, than like, oh, okay, he's kind of in her consciousness while she's making her wish or something. It would have made a little bit more sense. But I think with this conversation about consent, which is an important topic, I'm not disagreeing with you, but I think the way that people have been talking about it in terms of Wonder Woman is odd, because it's overlooking the fact that Steve is inhabiting this body. It's his body, essentially, once he comes back. And it's just like every body swap movie, I mean, I didn't hear people complaining about this. I mentioned this comparison to you. I didn't hear people complaining in the movie Freaky, which is still playing in some theaters, and it's a very funny horror movie by the same guy that did the Happy Death Day movies. And in that, Vince Vaughn plays this serial killer who swaps bodies with a teenage girl, and when he wakes up in the morning as the teenage girl, the first thing he does when he's looking in the mirror is grab her boobs. So it's like, okay, why didn't anybody care about that? But we're making a big deal about Steve and Diana and this random third person who may be dead. We don't know.
I think that the film handled it in a very clunky way, as you're pointing out, and it needed to explain itself a little bit more. But I agree. This is, whenever we have a body swap story, this is always going to be an issue, particularly, if you're talking about gender, you're talking about sex. I think that the reason why people latched onto this is because it's obvious that Steve and Diana have sex.
Yeah.
And that he's doing this in the body of another man. Mm-hmm. And so then that gets into thorny issues of obviously the other man cannot consent to it, but as you're pointing out, it's Steve's body now, it's problematic the way he got there, but it does belong to him at the moment. So it's not like there is a second person in there at the same time,
exactly,
who is unable to consent to what's happening.
I personally think that this is going to be explored again at some point, because like we know there's going to be a third movie now, and I guess Patty Jenkins is signed on to direct it, so that's like totally unheard of for a woman to get to direct a trilogy. But also there's now talk about DC's future direction is going to include multiverses and stuff. There was a line when Steve and Diana are first reunited, and he's talking about how he remembered being in the plane and then he was just not there anymore, and he didn't know where he was, but he was somewhere. And so it's like the indication, it sounds like, okay, well, that's some version of an afterlife, but maybe it wasn't. Maybe he was in another dimension. Maybe he's actually alive, and they'll bring him back in the third movie again.
Oh, for God's sake. I mean, I don't argue with seeing Chris Pine all the time,
Right.
Well, so let's keep on talking about Steve and
yes,
Steve's return and everything. So the second question that we had was from Shakita at Serena6783. How long did Diana actually know Steve in the past? Could not have been more than a week or two, right? And I think that that's probably accurate. I don't remember the full timeline of the original film, but yeah, they don't know each other for a very long time. I think that, what might be in back of this question is, well, is she
why is she
really
pining away
for
him for 70 years?
Yeah, exactly. And I agree that that's one of the questions that you kind of ask in watching this film, that I was like, oh man, she's obsessed with him, right? She's spending and you do kind of go like, has she spent 70 years like just not dating anybody? Is that what this is? Or is this just like a moment for her that she's remembering him for some reason? I think that there are a lot of different reasons why Steve is such a focal point. And one of them, and I do think that we need to think about, if we're going to think about the timeline of everything. So he is the first man that she meets.
Ever,
right? After not really knowing what men are, not really, and definitely not thinking that they're great, right? Mm-hmm. She meets him, and as we talked about, when we talked about the original film, he's like an actually nice guy.
Yep. He
listens to her, he respects her, he realizes how powerful she is, and he is not embarrassed by that at all. He cares about her, he treats her as an equal, all of these things. And so her first experience with men generally is this guy who in many ways is is a perfect man in a lot of ways. And she never gets to have a long enough relationship with him to the point where, he's not always going to be so perfect, obviously, because he's human. But so she loses him at this point. They've slept together one time. This has been her first experience in the world of men, in the world of humanity. This has been her first experience with a man, and he kind of represents to her, I think, the best of humanity. And she loses that. Fast forward 70 years, and I think that the film does this very deliberately. All of the men around her hit on her and patronize her at the same time. She's a beautiful woman, they crowd around her, they try to talk to her, they treat her like she is a second-class citizen, they're constantly annoying her, etc. And I don't think that this is her first experience with that in the 1980s. But I have a feeling that this has been her primary experience of men across the past 70 years. And I think that that's very important to look at, that her first experience of men is Steve, and he seems to be the best of what a man is and what a man should be. And a lot of the men that she meets aren't that great.
Exactly.
So her attachment to him makes sense within that context.
Exactly. 100% co-sign on all of that. And I will only add that for Diana, who is, we're not sure if she's immortal or just very, very, will have a very, very long life. But time doesn't pass the same way for her. She's lived through a lot of things over 70 years since we last saw her. Or I guess it'd be, I don't know. Would it be 70 years? Yeah, I guess so. I don't know. I can't do math. Anyway, but time passes differently for her. So it makes sense to me that she would continue to have this soft spot, this feeling, this attachment to this person from a long time ago. And it wouldn't necessarily feel like the same amount of time as that would feel for us. And then on top of that, not only, like you pointed out, that not only is she constantly surrounded by these just gross men who want to possess her, really, they want to win her as a prize. She spends that time thinking about the best things about him, because that was all she experienced. And so over the course of many decades, when you just think about all the good things about a person, naturally, you're just going to more and more idealize them as well. So it makes total sense to me that even after only a week or two, or maybe 3 of knowing this guy, that when you spend 70 years pining for him, and no pun intended, it makes total sense to me that she would have this idealized version in her head, and that no one else would match up to that. No one else would be good enough. And it's not just because of the fact that she doesn't have any other options. But nothing can match up to what exists in her mind.
Yeah, and I absolutely believe that she is probably, at a certain point, and probably directly after she loses him, she closes herself off from other legitimately nice people and legitimately nice men, because she has lost this love. But in some way, I think that we do have to remember that her experience is not a normal experience growing up in the normal human world. She grew up in a land of women.
Right.
So she's not jaded in one sense, but in the other sense, there's a lot of illusions that she's going to lose very quickly as an adult woman. Mm-hmm.
There's also the fact that, and we see, the first look at her apartment that she's living in Washington, D.C., she's got Steve's watch. She has these photos. And if you look closely at the photos, it's the people that were in that group that she fought with in World War I. So you've got Charlie and the chief and Samir. You've got these guys, Etta. And so you see these pictures, she's with them. And then slowly you get to the last photo is her and an elderly Etta, who presumably was the last one left. And then there's a picture of just Diana at Trevor Ranch by herself. And so it's like she made connections with people and had to lose them over the course of years. And it makes sense that she wouldn't want to put herself in that situation, because she doesn't have a normal lifespan. And no matter who she ends up with or who she surrounds herself with, she's going to constantly be having to say goodbye to people.
Yeah, I think that that's a really good point. She's not, her existence is very different from everybody else's. And I think that this then connects to something else that I wanted to talk about, was just the initial connection between Diana and Barbara, which I think is part of what drives the first half of the film, or so it's definitely the first 45 minutes. Is there, and again, this is something that has been criticized a lot, but I'm not entirely certain why. So yeah, you get the sort of trope of, the kind of geeky girl with glasses and curly hair and everything, who then becomes gorgeous. Well, first of all, Kristen Wiig is hot with the glasses and the curly hair. I don't even know why. Like, she doesn't need to lose them in order to be hot, but she as her character feels that she does.
It's the confidence. Like once she loses them, she's able to stand up a little straighter. She's able to comfortably walk in heels, and she feels better, which is, it's funny because I don't think the movie explores it, but it's like, that's the real reason that people are drawn to her. She has Diana's confidence.
Yeah, and that's part of what she's wishing for. She wants to be more like Diana, right? She wants to, and it isn't just, oh, I want to look like her, I want to be beautiful like her, or anything like that. It's more like you said, I want to have her confidence, I want to have her strength. And I think that in some ways she's all of us to a certain degree. I mean, you know, you look, I think one of the reasons why Wonder Woman is so popular, particularly among women, is that we look at her and go like, oh my God, she's beautiful, she's intelligent, she's strong, she's like, she has all of these powers, like you kind of want that. And so Barbara in some ways is sort of a stand-in for the female audience. But I was really interested in the way that they had their initial introduction, and Diana's kind of standoffish, doesn't really want to have a conversation. Barbara's sort of almost fawning over her, and it troubles her a little bit, but I think that it's just more, I don't think that she's really rejecting her. She's just like, I don't want to get close to people.
Yep.
But then she does. And in fact, she's the one that proposes them going out for an early dinner together. And they begin to make friends, and they have this great conversation. And Barbara becomes kind of possessive of her, right? So when Steve shows up, she's like, oh, hello, old friend, I'm the new friend. You know, that kind of thing. But there is that, like, she wants to be Diana's friend, and you get the impression that Diana wants to be her friend. There's also, I think we should talk about it, there's also sexual tension going on there.
Oh yeah, there is.
And that again is an interesting element that I wish that this film series would explore more, because there's heavy indication that Diana is bisexual. And of course we dwell on the relationship with Steve Trevor, but her interaction with Barbara and the way in which they are beginning to become friends, and they're getting closer to each other, and they're like talking about, you know, have you ever been in love and things like that. It's female friendship, but there's also there's more of a sexual component to it. And I didn't find that relationship to be particularly unbelievable. I know a number of people said that, like, oh, Diana's just, you know, ignoring her, rejecting her. It's like, no, I don't think that she is at all. They're sort of beginning to build this friendship. And then things go all pear-shaped because Steve comes back and she's having to deal with all of these other things. So I found Barbara's character really fascinating. And I would have to watch the film a couple more times to really pinpoint why. But I think that she is a far more nuanced individual than a lot of the reviews have given her credit for.
Yeah, I feel like people look at the trope of how she's first introduced and just kind of stop paying attention in a way. Like they don't explore that character any further as they're watching the movie. And I think that's unfortunate, because I agree with you. I think that there is a lot of depth there, a lot of layers that we don't, this isn't merely like a makeover type of journey, like trope where, oh, she has a makeover and suddenly she's popular and we don't need to know anything else about her. Like you watch her go from idolizing, in a way, Diana, to becoming the start of friends with Diana, to then getting relegated to the side. And so ultimately she gets very mad and very frustrated because she's also watching Diana lose her power. She doesn't know what's happening because she doesn't know who Diana really is, but she watches Diana become not the person that she thought, and decides, well, I don't even want to be her. I don't want to be like anybody else. I want to be my own version of me. And that's when she fully becomes Cheetah. That doesn't work out so well, but it's when she moves, like when she, because of the time that she spent being sort of like Diana and getting to see a totally different side of Diana, that makes her want to become something even else, something different. And I think that it's so much more interesting than we've seen in other versions of this type of story where the person starts to become the other person or become like them, and that's just kind of where it stops. And for Barbara to go just a little bit further, I think is really interesting, and I like that. And I like the way that she ends up too, because then she loses that power, not totally by her own choice. But it's interesting because I hope that we will see her again, because I'd like to see some more exploration of kind of the aftermath of what she's been through and what she's done to herself.
I have a feeling that she's going to come back. I mean, they sort of set that up with the last shot of her. Well, and the other thing that I think a number of people have kind of pinpointed as the moment that she really begins to turn, as it were. But I think that it's an interesting moment, and I feel like some people have misread it. So early on in the film, a drunk man tries to assault her in the park. And she's like shouting no, she's like trying to push him off, but she's having real difficulty kind of just pushing him away. And Diana saves her, right? And says like, oh, you've got to use his strength against him, right? And then the same man later on, she's going for a run, and the same man recognizes her and hits on her again. And she has these powers already, and she knows that she does. And she beats the shit out of him, basically. And one of my favorite moments during that, and it is a satisfying scene, I'm sorry.
Oh yeah.
One of my favorite moments is that she says no 3 times, but she says it differently each time. And that it's a really interesting scene. And a number of people have been like, well, this is where she becomes, dark and evil. It's like, no, this is where the world has been stomping on her for a very long time. And this man has kind of become representative of that. And finally, she gets to fight back. And she has this strength in order to fight back, which she didn't feel she had before. Even though, like, Diana could have taught her some self-defense moves, probably, long before she had powers. But I don't think that that's the moment that Barbara becomes evil or anything like that. And I don't think that that's the way that the film treats it. It's that you keep on stomping on women, you keep on treating women like this, you keep on kind of going like, well, she deserved it, or well, she shouldn't have been running that late at night in the dark, etc. And eventually the women are going to fight back, right? And it might not look the way that you want it to.
Yeah.
So I actually really liked that scene, and I liked the way that Kristen Wiig played it, and I liked the way that the film treated it, which is that she commits this act of violence, but it's this final straw almost of like, I'm fucking done with this. And you understand why.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It would have been different if she'd been running along, just saw the guy and then attacked him for what had happened previously, which he had in a way already kind of paid for when Diana knocked him across the park. It would have been different if she had just like gone and acted out against him without him doing anything in that moment, but she doesn't. She stops because he is once again trying to hit on her and be all creepy and gross, and who knows what he would have done if she wasn't by that point who she was. And to me, yeah, I agree with you. It's not about her turning to evil. It's about her becoming, like, taking control of herself, like really understanding how powerful she has become. Mm-hmm. And I think that really matters. I don't think her turn happens until a bit later when she really joins forces with Max and decides that Diana is an enemy. That's when she becomes evil.
Yeah, and even then, again, you understand why she wants to defend Max, because she is losing her humanity as a result of this wish that she has made.
And I say evil, I don't really even mean evil. I think she's definitely becomes like the villain in that, but even then, I mean, I think that's the problem, and you've pointed this out too. I think that's the problem people have with this movie is like, is really anybody in this actually evil?
Yeah.
And I think people struggle with the fact that the answer is no.
Yeah, and that's what I was kind of trying to say earlier on when we were talking about like how all of the wishes are human wishes.
Mm-hmm.
Barbara defending Maxwell Lord, what she's not really defending him as a person. She's defending the new power that she has, and that she's afraid, I think she's quite frightened that without it, she's not going to be anything anymore. She's going to have to go back to being ignored, to being assaulted, to being victimized. And she doesn't want to. And so she's been kind of, she's fallen into a trap that a lot of women experience, of, you know, and it's one that I've talked about before. You either get to be the victim or the monster.
Mm-hmm.
And when that's the only choice that society is willing to give you, then the choice, you know, am I going to be a victim? Am I going to be a monster? I'd much rather be the monster. And that's ultimately what Barbara chooses. She doesn't recognize that Diana in some ways actually represents a third choice, which is you can choose to not fall into that game, and you have the opportunity to not fall into that. But she doesn't recognize that. And it's partially because of the way that she has been treated her entire life, probably.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Should we talk about Max?
Let's talk about Max, because he is a fascinating character as well.
I love him so much, and not just because of how much I love Pedro Pascal, which is a lot.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, Pedro Pascal is obviously having a great time. He's playing sort of a half Donald Trump, but not really. Is like,
I love that he said that his inspiration for playing this character and kind of what he was trying to channel was Nicolas Cage, because I was just like, yes, he nails it. Totally.
I see that. It's almost Nicolas Cage as a televangelist or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, what I really liked is that he gives him a great deal of humanity, and you see what's underneath all of the kind of grandstanding and the flashiness is that he's a failure. And he knows that he's a failure, and he desperately doesn't want to be one, not just because he wants to earn money and things like that, but because he doesn't want to make his son ashamed of him. Mm-hmm. And he believes that the only way he can do that is by, is basically bargaining with the devil. Like, that's essentially what he does. But he's a great character because, again, he's going about things the wrong way, obviously.
I love the way we first meet him, because it goes from this opening scene of Diana competing in this sort of version of the Olympics and having that moment where she doesn't get to win because she was trying to cheat, and her aunt is like, nope, that's not the way we do it. And she says, no hero is born in lies. And so it goes from there to this mall, and we see a bank of TVs and this commercial, this very 1980s, have it all, live your best life commercial that Max Lord is doing. And he's promising all sorts of wealth and everything you want without having to work for it. He specifically says, get anything you want and you don't have to work for it. That is such a perfect transition. And I love that Patty Jenkins did that and introduced us to Max Lord in that way, because I think it's such a stark contrast and really lets you know who Max Lord is. Not that he really is this flashy guy, but that's who he's trying to present to the world. So when you actually meet him, not on the TV, you get to already see, okay, he's one of those just super fake people who is just trying to basically rip people off. And I just think it's such a brilliant way to introduce the character. And when we see the glimpses of his life later, at the end, when we're getting to see those flashbacks, it becomes clear the reason that he wants his son to look up to him is because he didn't have a father he could look up to. And he has tried to go about everything in the completely wrong way his entire life, but it makes sense. And, he came from a broken home with an abusive family, and he was really tormented in school. And it's and it's sort of the same thing that Barbara goes through. It's you push people hard enough and long enough, and I'm not defending what those two ultimately do, but it's when people keep getting knocked around, like you say, you keep being the victim or you become the monster, and both of them choose to be the monster in those moments when they have to make that choice.
Yeah, their life experiences don't excuse them, but they do explain them.
Yeah.
And it is this twistedness. So Lord's desperation to not be a failure, especially in the eyes of his son, gets twisted to the point that his desires, his desire is a good one in a lot of ways. He doesn't want to be a failure. Okay, that makes sense, right? But he almost destroys the world as a result, right? Barbara's desire is to be more like this woman that she admires, and that gets twisted around. I thought that, again, it's a fascinating film because there isn't a villain. There are human beings who make really bad decisions and are well on their way to being villains, but you understand them.
And I think that's why important. Sorry.
No, go on.
And I think that's why this movie is actually so well done and so good, is because of the fact that it doesn't totally rely on typical comic book movie tropes, where you have a very clear villain who has to be defeated in the end. And usually by defeated, we mean either they get killed or they get arrested and hauled off to jail. And neither of those things happen for Barbara or for Max. And I think people struggle with that. In fact, I saw a conversation happening last night that I was just like, it's weird that people just are upset that there seem to be no consequences. And it's like, well, we don't know what the consequences are. We didn't see the consequences, but that doesn't mean that there aren't any, because Diana is not about that. She just wanted to stop the threat and help people. And part of what makes Diana so powerful is her amazing empathy.
Yeah.
And so for her, she was able to use that empathy. That's not what stopped Barbara, but that is what stopped Max. And yeah, and I think that for her, having to make the choice to give up Steve again was ultimately what helped her have the amount of empathy she needed to stop Max and help him see what he was doing.
Yeah, it's that sense of sacrifice, that she's like, I have to sacrifice this because for the greater good, for the good of the rest of the world. And so do you. You have to let this go. You have to renounce what you think you want in order to really get what you need, kind of thing.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I really liked that. And I didn't feel that we needed to see, Lord being punished or anything like that. I think that he's been punished in a lot of ways simply by the experience of this kind of power, that it's almost destroyed him.
Yeah.
And it almost destroys everything that he loves.
Yeah. It's interesting too, because I think this is something that doesn't get explored at all in the film, but talking about kind of what happens to people as a result of this. Once he renounced his wish, that basically would have undone everybody's wish. I know that technically they all have to renounce their wishes around the world, but it's like his wish was to become the Dreamstone, and he did. So he's the one granting the wishes. So once he doesn't have that ability, once he gives that up, it's like, does that just undo everything? I'm not clear on how that worked.
There's some explanation where I think that at one point she says, I'm not talking to you, I'm talking to everyone.
Yeah.
And so she's trying to say to them, you have to take back your wish.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that there's that, although there is some indication that if you destroy the Dreamstone, it will. I think that was what the explanation was, that if everyone renounces their wish, so everyone who makes a wish renounces it and it undoes it.
Yeah.
Or you have to destroy the Dreamstone, which would be killing Max.
Mm-hmm.
And she's not about to do that because Wonder Woman does not kill people. If she can keep from it. People might accidentally die, but
yeah,
she does not kill anyone. And so that's why she's talking to the world. She doesn't want to kill Max. She wants to help him. And she wants to help the world, heal itself, basically.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love how, like, in that big moment at the end when she's trying to stop him, he's still trying to promise all these things, and he's just like, you could have kept your pilot and your powers. You just need to join me. And he's still making these promises, even though he's watching, like, he's about to lose everything. And I don't know. I find him so fascinating. And Diana, by that point, she's not considering it anymore. Like, she already knows, no, this isn't the way. She understands now her aunt's lesson that that she learned in the beginning. And I think it's so great. One thing that I did find, one of the conversations I saw last night, there was a question that I thought was kind of an interesting question. It was, let me see, where did I put it? Oh yeah, here it is. So the guy says, the real question we should focus on is why, if we're supposed to believe that Lord loves his son more than anything, the stone didn't take his son's health as the thing he valued most. To me, it's pretty clear that that's not what he valued most.
Yeah. I think that at the end he decides that his son is what he values most. He decides that he will not destroy everything in order to make his son proud or anything like that. Like, that's the choice that he makes. Mm-hmm. But he does value himself more.
Yeah, he does. And he is actually losing his own health as he's granting wishes and things. Like, it's taking a lot from him. He's losing, like, his eyes at one point, the blood vessels are burst. He's clearly, like, going crazy. Like, he's losing himself and his own humanity and his own health. And that, I think that it's pretty clear that that's what's going on. There are moments where it's like, you know, the assistant comes in and says, oh, you have your son tonight. And he's like, again, why is it my turn again? And he realizes his son is right outside and can hear what he's saying. And then it's like, oh, I've just screwed up. But that's because his son isn't the most important thing to him right then. He has to get to that point of thinking that he's lost him or worrying that he's lost him, to realize that is what he actually values most. Yeah,
exactly. That also, my impression was that pretty much everyone who makes a wish loses something personal, like something unique to them as an individual. So Diana begins losing her powers, Barbara loses her humanity, etc. So it doesn't seem like, at least, and again, and this is probably a failure of the film for not really providing enough exposition about the stone itself. But my impression was that it's more taking away something from you, that it's not necessarily the thing that you value most. It's just it's something that you value, and that you are now going to lose, and it's not really predictable what that thing is going to be. It's the evil of the stone, essentially.
Right. And also, once Max becomes, it's interesting. I think that it's a little bit explored, not with Diana, but when Max is the Dreamstone, essentially, and he's talking to her at the end, and he basically, the indication is, and he might even specifically say it, that he's the one that gets to decide what he's taking from people. Like, when he goes to Egypt and gives the guy back his ancestral land and says, okay, now I'm taking your oil. Like, he gets to decide what he keeps as he's granting wishes.
Yeah. Which also means that the stone itself, when it was just a stone, makes that decision as well.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think it is a much more interesting and nuanced film than a lot of people are giving it credit for.
Yeah. And I wonder, I mean, I don't know. I wonder if maybe it doesn't matter, but I kind of feel like maybe part of the problem is everyone sitting at home watching it themselves and scrolling through Twitter as they're watching it, rather than sitting together in a theater having this experience and then chatting about it afterwards.
Yeah, I mentioned this at one point, I think, because I kind of want to avoid accusing people of not paying attention, but I was just like, some of the interpretations of this film read like it's someone who like kept on looking up in the middle of glancing at their phone.
Yeah.
And I cannot tell you, and I usually don't judge people for this, but I'm beginning to. I cannot tell you how many people I saw who said that they were watching it while live tweeting it for the first time, right?
Yeah.
And that makes me go like, okay, I've live tweeted films before. Usually they're films that I've seen multiple times. You can't pay attention to everything that is happening in a film and tweet at the same time. It's just not possible. So yeah, I feel like that there's a little bit of people like missing parts or missing exposition or missing kind of like explanations for things and then just deciding that it was bad.
Yeah, that's exactly what it seems like. I mean, maybe not, but that's really what it seems like. And I think it's really unfortunate because now people have this idea in their heads, and it'll be interesting to see if people come around on it after another viewing or two. But I think part of the problem of everyone having access to it at home right now, well, not everyone, but the people that do, I think there's so much else out there that people who've already decided after the first viewing that they didn't like it, how likely are they to watch it again anytime soon? And will they come around on it? I don't know. Or will they just double down on like, nope, it's bad.
Yep.
It's really too bad. I've watched it twice and I liked it the first time. I really liked it the second time.
I agree. Like yeah. I think it's a good film. That's the conclusion of all of this. It's actually a much better film than what people are saying. And yeah, it definitely has issues, and I take that under consideration. But I did enjoy the film. Like I liked watching it.
And can we talk about? I didn't put this on the notes, but can we talk about Linda Carter's cameo?
Yes. Even I kind of knew that it was coming, but I was like, that's awesome.
It made me cry.
I like the way that they dealt with it too. Like I like the character that she plays.
She actually got a character that had a backstory, and it was so cool. And I was just like, oh, is she gonna show up in the third movie? I hope she does. Like, I hope she and Diana join forces in the third movie. That'd be badass. But but even if she doesn't, just knowing that she's out there in the world protecting people in her own way was really, really cool. And I love that it wasn't just a, oh, hey, look, it's Linda Carter cameo. It was like, no, she actually played someone who mattered to the story.
Yep, I agree. Yeah, she was fantastic. It was so cool to see her. And I knew that she was going to be in the film, but then I'd like completely forgotten about it.
Yeah.
And so we got to the cameo, and I was like, I initially was just like, oh, it's Wonder Woman. It's like, oh my God, it's not Wonder Woman. It's Wonder Woman.
Yep. Oh man, it made me so happy. I was obsessed with that show when I was a kid, and I'm so happy that it's on HBO Max. All 4 seasons are there. I haven't started watching it again yet, but I'm really excited. Well,
any final thoughts about Wonder Woman 84? Or are we ready to close this out?
My final thought is, if you have not watched it and you've been listening to this podcast, I don't know why, but go watch the movie. And if you have watched it, regardless of how you felt about it, go watch it again.
Yes, I agree with that. It is actually a lot of fun. At the very least, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. It's funny because I did hear some people complaining about like, well, why is it set in 1984 if there aren't these like massive 80s musical number, record drops and stuff, needle drops. And I'm just like, it's funny because I grew up in the 80s. I'm very much a child of the 80s. Didn't even notice that there weren't any 80s songs in it. Some people were complaining about it.
Yeah, you might actually be talking to someone of my generation who believes that all of 80s soundtracks are just like, Duran Duran and B-52s and
yeah, which
Madonna.
I mean, yeah, you think that, but it's like, I think that it was set in the 80s because of the Cold War and the geopolitical elements, not because the 80s are awesome. You know?
Also, the joy of seeing Steve Trevor wear a fanny pack.
Oh my
just,
gosh,
like,
yes.
I do enjoy the fact that Steve like loves the fanny pack. Like he's just like, this is the best thing ever. Why? This is awesome. That
It's
she's
true.
like, are you sure? No, I want this. Like this one particular thing.
I did see someone complain, and so I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole. I did see someone complain about the fact that he didn't know how to use an escalator, and by 1918 he definitely would have seen an escalator before. And it's like, well, but so I researched it, and the first patent was filed in 1895, but they never built that one. Then there was another patent in 1896. They never built that one either. It's like, well, yeah, escalators existed, but that doesn't mean he would have used one.
Yeah.
That's all. I just had to say that.
All right.
The fanny pack, yes. And I love he calls it like an American issue bag.
Yeah.
I just love Steve so much. Oh, sorry. Now I'm on a Steve like thing, but just when they break into the Air and Space Museum and take the jet,
Yeah.
or when he first sees the picture of he sees the space shuttle, and he's like, what kind of jet is that? And she's like, oh wait, there's something for you to see, and she takes him to the museum, and him getting to see that we've landed on the moon and we have a whole space program, and just like he got teary-eyed, and it was just so sweet. And when he's behind the cockpit, when he's in the cockpit of the plane and he's about to fly, and he's like tearing up, and it was just such genuine joy, and it just makes me love Steve so much more.
Yeah, he's a great character.
He's
a great character, and he is also played by the best Chris. So
it's true. It's true. There is no equal.
So I think that is going to close us out for this episode about Wonder Woman 1984. And of course, you can give us your opinion on Wonder Woman 1984. However, I am now at the point where I will not tolerate any bullshit anymore. Like I'm just like, you're a fucking idiot. So if you want to come to me and be like, actually, it sucks, just like fuck you and just fuck off. Like, why are you even here?
If you disagree with us on any of these points, it's fine to tell us so, but do so in a respectful way. Otherwise, we will kindly tell you to fuck.
Yeah. Also, depending upon what mood I'm in, it might not be kind.
True.
But you can get in touch with us on Twitter and Instagram at Citizen Dame Pod. And of course, we are very grateful for our patrons, who are just lovely people and continue to support us now into this new year. So we would like to thank especially Matt, Heather, Adriana, Michael, James, Katie, Carriata, Mason, Matthew, Michelle, Monty, Nanina, Nicole, Robert, Sharon, Steve, Tao, and Will. Thank you so much, guys. And we are rearranging the levels on our Patreon. So there are going to be some changes coming. We know that we've been promising that, but that is happening. We're just tired. If you want to support us on Patreon, we're on patreon.com/citizendame. You can also throw us some money on our Ko-Fi account. That's ko-fi.com/citizendame. We are monitoring those, and Ko-Fi is great because you could just throw us a couple of bucks and you don't have to make any commitment. We also have our Zazzle store at zazzle.com/citizendamepod, where you can buy masks and t-shirts and buttons and all sorts of fun stuff. You can also get in touch with us via our email, that's citizendamepod@gmail.com. And of course, we have our website, citizendamepod.com, where we post reviews and Blu-ray reviews and essays about Birds of Prey that apparently some random dude on the internet doesn't believe even exists. I'm feeling a bit salty again today.
Yes.
Yeah, that's our website. That's citizendamepod.com. And of course, you could get in touch with us individually. I am on Twitter and Instagram at LHBusiness. Karen, where are you?
I am on Twitter and Instagram at Karen M. Peterson.
And that will close us out for today. Thank you so much, and happy 2021.
Bye.
I've seen this contest. Humble even the most seasoned warriors, Diana.
I can do it.
Just do your best. And remember, greatness is not what you think. Pace yourself and watch.